Welcome to our Adult Education Forum on Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Cost of Discipleship, which is the book that we will be studying for the next 6 weeks after today. Today, we're just going to focus on the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. How's that for graphics, huh? And to aid us for today only, I've got a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully I won't get knocked off like I did earlier today for our service. So I'm going to put us on share screen here and then have our PowerPoint presentation hopefully up. Hopefully you were able to watch the movie that I recommended on Amazon Prime Video called Bonhoeffer. It's not very long, but it's very highlights the main periods of his life. And let's see if we get that up and going. Good, here we go. Great, the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now, for those of you who are not really familiar, this is your first time of even hearing about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer lived during the early part of the 20th century, he was a Lutheran theologian, pastor. He was martyred for the faith by the Nazis, and he had a lot to say about the nature of the church. He also was involved in he was a double agent at one point for the Nazis and for the resistance movement, which began very early in 1933. And his family was very much engaged in many levels of it and were very, very aware of what was going on. He was executed or hung by the Nazis in a concentration camp, and we'll get to all those highlights of his life today. The reason I've chosen Dietrich Bonhoeffer for us to study during this time is because the central question that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was concerned about what is the nature of the church? What is the church? And that was the question that's really really dogged him, and that was the subject of his dissertation as well. And since we are at Grace going to be looking at the nature of the church and our mission and our vision and our strategy, I think this would be a good kind of a theological basis for us to be able to begin to look at the question of what is the church? What is it for? Why does the church exist? And then as we begin to unravel throughout the year our self searching and our self reflection about the nature of Grace Episcopal Church, I think this will serve as a good beginning theological groundwork for us. We're also going to be doing that throughout the year, looking at other theologians and what they say about the church. And that'll all be part of our adult formation for the year 2021. So I'm really excited about it. Despite the fact that I have a real fan of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I've quoted him often in my sermons, I've never really actually read the entire book cover to cover. I hate to say that. It was just nothing that was offered to me during my theological education. Some people consider Dietrich Bonhoeffer an evangelical, a Protestant, of course. And so in my Catholic upbringing, we just weren't reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer a lot. We were reading other theologians, but not Bonhoeffer. But I think Bonhoeffer has really captured the imagination of and theological world of not just Roman Catholics, but of course Protestants as well. So on to his life, and here's a quote here: "We are not simply to bandage the wounds of victims. Beneath the wheels of injustice, we are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself." And so that's that prophetic voice that Bonhoeffer had. We're going to look at the following topics today. Talk a little about his family, his academic training, time in Barcelona, New York, which were very, very instrumental in shaping his life, especially his time in New York. We're going to look at the Confessing Church, which was the German Christian movement that was supported by the Nazis. And then we're going to look at his time in London, his time as a seminary dean, the secret seminary in Finkenwald. We're going to look at his temporary return to the United States. And then when he became a double agent with the resistance movement, eventually his imprisonment and execution and what his legacy is. Today, we're going to look more at his life and not his theology. We're going to do that in the next 6 weeks. Well, I'm unpacking the book, The Cost of Discipleship. And please pause if you have any questions, just unmute yourselves, and please let me know what questions you've got. I'm willing to take questions during our session. So let's talk about the family of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. First of all, he comes from a very, I would say maybe in a sense, aristocratic family, but a very famous or well-known family, a family of high repute, both on his father's side and on his mother's side. These were people of the highest echelons and class and society within Germany. His father, Karl Bonhoeffer, was a professor of neurology and psychiatry. Eventually, later at the University of Berlin, he was a well-known psychiatrist. He wasn't really a big fan of Freud and Jung in the psychoanalysis world. He was much more a man of science and of only the empirical things, what he could see and what he could touch. So he had a much more, when it came to mental illness, he had a much more kind of physicalist, biological approach to solving these problems. His mother, Paula von Haas, also was the daughter of Claire von Haas, who was a pupil of Liszt. She was the granddaughter of Karl von Haas, who was a distinguished historian, and he was the chaplain to Kaiser Wilhelm. And so you could read all about it in the book by Eric Metaxas, where he gets into a very, very detailed of his genealogy and the fame. But his family is a very, like I said, a very high, within the society of Germany, very well known, and they had a beautiful life and many, many children, and we'll talk about those children now. Paula, by the way, was a homeschooler. She homeschooled the kids until they were about 7. Then they went off to public schools, but she didn't like the idea that she said Germany breaks the backs of kids twice. Once when they go to public schools as a young child, and second time when they're in the military. So she didn't want the children to suffer those first 7 years, and she wanted them to be close. But when they finally got to school, they were of course exceeding academically. The family had 8 children, beginning first with Carl Friedrich, who was a very well-known chemist, worked with Einstein, split the atom. I mean, this guy was, the whole family was probably in terms of the genius category. But, Carl set the standard very high, obviously working with Einstein and splitting the atom and all that kind of stuff. Walter, the second oldest, as you see in the picture there, was killed in action in World War I. He was killed very shortly after he left home. And that really had a huge, huge impact on Paula and her life for years. She was suffered from some depression over it, of course, and it really impacted the family. And it really brought the idea of World War I to home. I mean, initially when the war was declared, everybody thought, yay, we're at war. But then as cousins and other people began to start dying as a result of war, it really brought war home to them. And they were not pacifists. German people were very proud to serve in the military and believed in the country of Germany. But as the war went on, there was a lot of disappointment and dissatisfaction with the way the war, of course, turned out, because Germany, of course, lost the war. Then there was Klaus. He's the third one in line, a lawyer. He became a general counsel for the Lufthansa, was one of the top attorneys for the airline, but he was eventually executed in 1945. And then there was Ursula, who married a lawyer, Rudiger Schleicher, who was also later executed as well on the very same day on the 23rd of April. They all married well, and they all married people within the circle, their own social and intellectual economic circle. Christel was married to Hans von Dohnanyi, who was executed on April 9th, 45. Dohnanyi, we'll hear more about him. He worked at the abattoir. He was the the intelligence agent who was able to recruit Dietrich later into the resistance efforts. But Dohnanyi was very instrumental in all of that. Dietrich was, of course, executed 23 days before the Germans surrendered. And the Germans knew the war was going to be over, but they decided to get rid of all the prisoners who were imprisoned there. Sabine was Dietrich's twin. He was born about maybe 15 or 20 minutes before Sabine. He always held that over her, saying, you know, I'm older than you are and that kind of thing, but only by minutes. But she was the twin sister. She married a Jewish lawyer and professor, Gerhard Leibholz. But he was really a practicing Christian, but because he was half Jewish, the Germans and the Nazis really were trying to cleanse all of Germany from Jews, even if they had been converted to Christianity later. They didn't think that Jews who were Christian by faith or by choice counted. It was a racial thing, but it really brought home the whole Jewish question to the Bonhoeffer family. That was that she married somebody who was half Jewish, and Jews were being persecuted. So the whole family was very concerned about the anti-Semitism. In fact, the story is told in Metaxas's book, Bonhoeffer, that once Dietrich got into a fight at school when he was a child, and there was the hint that it might have been related to anti-Semitism, and the whole family and Paula especially made a big deal at the school about the fact that this is not tolerated in the Bonhoeffer home. So anti-Semitism was for them a strong sin, something to be looked down upon. The youngest, Suzanne, married a theologian by the name of Walter Dress. When the Bonhoeffer family wasn't particularly religious, they didn't go to church on a regular basis. It didn't mean, however, that they weren't instructed at home. Paula, through her homeschooling, did a lot of teaching the children biblical stories. They sang hymns. Dietrich learned to play the piano. They were very well churched, but at home. And you know, there wasn't a lot of need they felt to go to church. They believed that their Christian faith was something that they could live very kind of individually. And so the family really only occasionally went to church. We're not regular church goers. So when Dietrich announced at the age of 14, and he could have chosen anything to be. I mean, his father wanted him to, you know, follow in his footsteps, perhaps, or become a lawyer. But when he announced that he wanted to be a theologian at the age of 14, the family was sort of like in kind of dismay. And even his brother Klaus said to him, the church is poor, feeble, boring, petty, and bourgeois. At that, and the response from Dietrich was, well, in that case, I shall have to reform it. And so that begins, you know, and when Dietrich went off to become a theologian at the age of 14, I mean, who was thinking about becoming a theologian at 14? Maybe I was, but he believed that he would be an academic, not just a regular pastor, but a real high level academic. He believed it, and others believed it about him as well, because he was really a genius. His first year, as typical for many German youth at this time, was to spend the first year kind of like you might go to a community college, but the first year at Tübingen, University of Tübingen. And that's where during his year there, he took a trip to Rome. And that had a huge impact on him because German Lutheranism was very much German. And it was about the identity of being, you know, an ethnic group in an ethnic church. But when he got to Rome, he was overwhelmed by the beauty, the music, but he was overwhelmed as well he saw the universality of the Roman Catholic Church, that people from all kinds of different parts of the world were going to Rome and saw themselves. He saw the universality that were worshiping there, and in particular, Palm Sunday was a very moving experience for him there. And he culturally went throughout all of Rome, visiting all the beautiful places that he had dreamed of going to. So he was excited to go to Rome. It was a tremendous trip, and it really had an impact on him in terms of seeing all the beautiful sights and the arts and the culture. And of course, it also impacted the way he thought about the nature of the church. He returns back to Berlin and attends the University of Berlin in 1924, which was really the center of the academic world at that time. And it was also the center of two theologians that he followed and thought highly of. One is Adolf von Harnack, who is really the epitome of liberal theologians. Von Harnack was questioned the virgin birth, questioned the resurrection, questioned the resurrection, the incarnation, and he really represented that the liberal world. Schleiermacher was very much about having a very personal experience of God and religion. And the other person that was teaching at the time there was Karl Barth. And Karl Barth was a much more conservative voice. And here are two quotes that sort of really summarize their training. So, for example, Harnack said, it's unscientific to speculate on who God is. Our job is just to study the texts and their history, to do exegesis. He was a church historian. And so he's written most of his books, Harnack, were on the subject of church history. And Adolf von Harnack was trying to woo Dietrich to be his successor, to have him as his dissertation advisor. But Dietrich, sensing that this was not where he wanted to go, being another liberal icon, he held back. He wanted to study under Harnack. He really wanted to be at his feet and learn from him, but he really didn't want to make that final leap. The other person that he really believed was completely on the other side of the fence. And he said that Karl Barth said that God on the other side of the fence revealed himself through the texts. Okay, the only reason for the texts was to know him, to know God. The only way to know anything about God was to rely on the revelation from God. So Karl Barth represents this conservative wing that says God is sovereign, God is above and beyond all of us and our knowledge, and the only way we're going to get to know God is through the Bible. And so Harnack and Barth are both really opposite sides, and Dietrich is trying to navigate between the middle of the two, studying with both of them, admiring both of them. Karl Barth just could not stand Harnack, and they couldn't stand each other. And Dietrich was just sort of wonderfully caught in the middle of it.
Father?
Yes.
Back one slide, it looks to me like they're saying the same thing.
No.
Harnack is saying study texts and their history, and Barth is saying God reveals himself through the texts. That seems like the same thing to me. What's different?
Harnack was saying, look, you can't think about God. Just look at the texts, look at their history, and you can have a very historical and critical approach to the texts. Whereas Barth was saying, no, God the Bible is the word of God. It is God revealing himself. Barth believed in all the miracle stories, the resurrection, the virgin birth. They were completely two spectrums. I think you'd have to read a little bit of Harnack and Barth to really see more and more of the differences. But and Metaxas does a good job in the book of sort of making a few of those comments.
So von Harnack was saying, study the text and let your intuition take you from there.
No, let your science, not your intuition, let your science take you there. He was very much a just look at the text. You can't speculate about God. We can't know God. And these texts are very historical. You have to study them like a historian, like you would any other science book or like any other book of history. Whereas Barth was seeing the living, breathing God in the book, and it was God above and beyond,
Okay.
but God that could be known through the texts. So,
okay. So he took the translations in today's context rather than in the context in which they were written, whereas Harnack said, take it in the context of the times that things were written and understand those times and what was evolving.
Yeah, that might be one way to look at it. Barth is looked at as a neo-orthodox by the church, by theologians. He's very much he's in the camp of the evangelicals, and of the conservative wing of Christianity, whereas Harnack was seen as the liberal champion. And even by liberals today, he's seen as a sort of their liberal champion. And it's okay. Well, what can we know about God? Well, all we can know, and is we just look at the text, and the texts themselves may be contradictory, but that's okay. Just take it at kind of at their face value. Whereas, God is an active agent and using the texts as a means to know God. We'll talk more about this as we go in the next few weeks.
Yeah, it seems like von Harnack is more in line with the way we as Episcopalians would read the Bible, as we've been doing it in Bible study, whereas Barth is more take each word that's in the Bible literally, regardless of the translation or the conflicting to another passage in the Bible, what have you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Harnack is definitely the hero of the liberal wing of the church and of theologians. Okay. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer completed his doctorate at the age of 21. It took me about 20 years longer than him to finish my doctorate, but nonetheless, back then, this was a kid who was a genius, and he turned his dissertation into a book called Sanctorum Communio, and so he studied with, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but he studied with a professor at Berlin who was a dogmatic theologian, and so everybody was surprised, but he thought about this for a long time as to which way to go with what theologian, but he ended up with going with von Heer, I think is his name, or Scheer. Anyways, that was the question that occupied his whole life. What is the church? What is the nature of the church? And his answer is, it is Christ existing as a church community. Christ exists in the body of the faithful. When we gather together, the two or three, and we pray, we are the church, and Christ exists when we are present as church. Okay. I think this is a good thing for us to remember as we move forward in this next year. Once he got his doctoral degree, he didn't want to just remain in the academic world. He believed that he needed to ground his theological studies in real life, practical church life. And so he took a year to live in Barcelona. He studied Spanish over the weekend, and by Monday he was, reading Spanish. I mean, this is the kind of person that we're dealing with. He could, take Spanish lessons on a weekend, and boom, on Monday he's reading Spanish. He even read Don Quixote in Spanish to improve his Spanish later on. He went to go see a play, and he was inspired to then read Don Quixote in the Spanish, which I did in high school, and that was really a challenge, but he did it, and it was just amazing. Anyways, he goes to Barcelona. There is a German expatriate church there, and he went there and he studied there. He didn't. The people there at this the Germans who were at this expat church, there were about 6,000 Germans in Barcelona at the time, but only about maybe 40 people came on a regular basis. So he went there to help out the old pastor who'd been there for a while, who wanted to take some vacation time, and others wanted to take some vacation time. And so he went there kind of as the assistant pastor to this elderly Lutheran pastor there. And while he was there, attendance started going up. Normally it would drop in the summer, but it actually, attendance increased in the summer because they liked his preaching. On his first day of Sunday school, one child showed up for Sunday school. He said, "This has got to change." So he started. They liked the way he taught, and so word got out, and he started talking to people. 15 came. Then he went to the homes of all 15 kids, and then 30 came the following week, and so we remained at about 30, 40 kids in the Sunday school program. He became very, very popular with the parish, and they even offered and asked him if he would stay on after his year. But the people there just were not, he wasn't stimulated intellectually. The Spaniards and the people there in Spain, and the Germans in Spain, had adopted a lot of the Spanish attitudes of, mañana, and in the afternoon we take, the siesta, and we go for coffee, and we sit around talking for hours about nothing. And he just couldn't stand it. He liked to be in that whole intellectual milieu of Berlin and Grunwald and all of his friends, that he had intellectual conversation. He missed that. And the people in Germany, or the people in Barcelona, the Germans, were not interested in that. They were conservative, they were staid, they were boring. But he did his year, and he would turn back to Barcelona, to Berlin. But then he was offered an opportunity to go to Union Theological Seminary in New York City. And so he did a year at Union, and he studied there under Reinhold Niebuhr, a great ethics theologian. I read much of his work in college. His brother as well was a theologian. So the Niebuhr brothers, there's Reinhold and, forgetting the name of the other one right now. Anyways, both of them were very much focused on the question of the nature of church. But he found Union Theological to be a liberal, vast wasteland of students who all they did was mock fundamentalists. He found that the seminarians there just really weren't intellectually curious. All they wanted to do was adopt liberal positions, and didn't really understand the true theology and even know how to do it. He really mocked them. He didn't think that they were of tremendous quality. He studied under Henry Emerson Fosdick, homiletics and preaching, and he was the icon of liberal preaching back then. Fosdick was, the Rockefellers built Fosdick Riverside Church in New York City, and Riverside has become sort of the bastion of liberal preaching and theology for many, many years. But he found Fosdick and that whole liberal wing really boring. But he was invited to go to Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, and the Adam Clayton Powell Sr. had just arrived as the head pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church, and Bonhoeffer was just blown away by the singing, the spirituals, the preaching, the seriousness with which people took their faith there, how they talked about the Word of God and about God being this personal personal experience in one's life. He was moved by the if you've ever been to a Black church, you know what I'm talking about. But it was really, he was shocked at the singing and the participation and the personal nature of people's faith in Christ. And it was a contrast to many of the pastors that Bonhoeffer had seen in Germany, where it was about theological erudition, being theologically correct in the pulpit and preaching these boring sermons. Here was a faith that was personal, and he got involved. He started going there to church every single Sunday, got involved with the youth programs and Sunday school, and he was like, here comes this German theologian, with spectacles into this Black church. And, he's quite the anomaly there, but he really found faith was personal there. And that really moved him tremendously. While he's in New York City, he sees this movie, All Quiet on the Western Front. regarding, it was a novel that had been written and then turned into a movie, and it showed sort of really the horrors of war. And he went with his friend Gene to go see this movie. And Gene Lasseter said that the Sermon on the Mount had influenced much of his theology. And Bonhoeffer began to see the poverty and the horrors of war through this movie. And it made a tremendous impression upon him as well. So that when he returned back to Berlin, he was a changed person. He was not the same person he was when he left for New York City. While he's back in Berlin, he writes his postdoctoral dissertation called Act and Being, and he talks a lot more about the role of the church. And when he completed this book, it allowed him to be now a university lecturer. And he submitted that, and it was accepted in 1931 after he returned from America. When Bonhoeffer returns, he finds that the church has begun to change. The church in Germany has got to hollow itself out. In a sense, it's got to empty its theology and put in a new theology. So they put in this Nazi theology that really saw Germans as part of the Reich, the Reign, and it really had to. The church distanced itself from Jews, proclaimed anti-Semitism. Jesus was the principal anti-Semite. There's a whole, the middle section of Metaxas's book really deals with the theology of this confessing church. As you can see, these pastors there, doing the Heil Hitler, the sign, the German Heil, the salute. And so the church in Germany had to be gutted of its theology, and a new theology had to be imposed so that the church could go forward. And so there was a marriage of the people, the folk, and the church in Christ together, and to make a German church. Hitler never said anything really bad about God or about Christians. He was useful. He thought they'd be useful. That's all he did. Hitler was never really a Christian, but he used the church for its power to pacify people. From the beginning, from 1933, as I mentioned, the whole Bonhoeffer family was from the very start very concerned. In fact, many Germans, as we know, were very, very concerned about the rise of Nazism. He thought that the rise of Hitler as leader, the word Führer means leader, was very dangerous. He believed that leadership should not be about me, myself, and I. It should be about servant leadership, about serving others. And in a radio address 2 days after Hitler was installed and won his election, or came into power, he made a radio address and talked about leadership and about servant leadership. And he told his fellow churchmen that the church had to resist Hitler, to speak up for the Jews who had no voice. And so in July of that same year, Hitler imposes new elections, basically a takeover of the church, and the elections were rigged. Most of the positions went to Nazi sympathizers. The Lutheran churches of Bavaria, Hanover, Württemberg remained intact, but had not yet been corrupted. So there was essentially two churches, one that was Nazi and one that was remaining faithful to Christian principles.
Question.
Yes.
So was the Lutheran church then a state-sponsored church?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, as it is in Canada. The Anglican Church is a state-sponsored church, as it was in England, Australia, and many parts of the world. So yeah, you can see what I'm talking about. That Lutheranism and other Protestant churches really were very identified ethnically, nationally. Right. As we see within the Orthodox churches as well. We've got Serbian and Greek and Russian and all that. So the ethnicity comes before the name of the church.
Right, so, right. But yeah. I was just wondering how Hitler had, that he could sort of do that to the church. So it's the church and the state were tied together then.
Right.
Okay.
What was the name of the church that maintained Christian principles?
The Confessing Church. The Confessing Church.
Oh, okay. And that still continued in Germany?
Yes, that was, but it was
from the Lutheran
yeah,
church?
but it had to kind of be underground. It was sort of like this amorphous church, and to become a real leader, and eventually Bonhoeffer becomes a lightning rod within the Confessing Church.
Oh, okay.
And he gets a lot of attention of the Nazis. So whereas the National Church, so we've got, that's just for our purposes, we'll call it the National Church is the German Nazi church, and the Confessing Church is the church that is puts out what's called the Barmen Declaration, which I'm going to upload to the chat so that you can see some of those principles in a minute. But it basically, a lot of it was written by Barth, by Karl Barth.
What was the name of the declaration?
The Barmen Declaration. And I'm going to upload a PDF of it to the chat room so that you can see.
B-A-R-M-A-N?
B-A-R-M-E-N. You can Google it if you want to, but I'm going to upload, I downloaded a PDF of it with the main points. It's not very long to read. You can read it on your own. But it basically affirms that the church is of the Old Testament and the New Testament. See, the Arian church wanted to cleanse everything in the Old Testament. It's too Jewish, anything that's Jewish, we're not going to accept.
I'm sorry, I don't see what you think you put in the chat room.
No, I haven't put it yet.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah, but once you end the meeting, we can't get to the chat room.
Oh, well, let me see if I can. I don't know how to do that. So I don't want to stop sharing because I'll mess it up or something like that. So, but I'll put it in there, and we'll talk about it, and I'll put it in there after I stop the share on the screen, so you can download it.
Okay.
So, but the Barmen Declaration and the church is saying, look, wait a minute. We are, the Jews are part of our Christian faith. In fact, there was even a move to, in a sense, protect the Jews by adopting them into the Confessing Church. It's a tricky thing, but they wanted to do that as a way of protecting the Jews and affirming. So one of the things that Bonhoeffer will do, and we will be doing as well, is we will be picking our favorite psalm and bringing that psalm with us as we begin our series, because and the Psalms become very much a part of Bonhoeffer's theology later on, and his practice as a community of people gathered together as a community, as a church, and that talks about in the book Life Together, which I have read all of it, and he talks about when he was a seminary dean and how he had a sort of semi-monastic life for the seminarians and what their life was like of prayer and community. And so he really believed in the importance of a church as being a community of faith. Okay. All right, so let's see here, where am I? National Church accepts the Arian paragraph, prohibits non-Arians from parish posts. So Bonhoeffer refuses a parish post in Berlin in protest. And then in May, in August, the Confessing Church asks Bonhoeffer to write the Bethel Confession. After revisions, he refuses to sign it because he says it's just too watered down. And then Bonhoeffer helps to organize the Pfarr für Notbound, which is a forerunner to the Confessing Church. And then in that same month, the National Church accepts the Arian paragraph, prohibits non-Arians from parish posts, and I already discussed that. Yeah. Okay. Did I have a duplicate slide there? No, I didn't. Okay, I just hadn't moved on. All right. All right. And then in May of '34, the Confessing Church, founded at Barmen, that's why it's called the Barmen Declaration, opposes the Nazi Party. Karl Barth, as I said, writes part or most of the Barmen Declaration. And they said Christ, not Hitler, is the head of the church. It's not a large movement, but it's a substantial source of opposition and witness to an opposition to the Nazis. But Bonhoeffer feels that he needs to take a step back and take a look at the big picture here. Karl Barth criticized him for going to London, but he takes off some time in London. He has an appointment again to minister to German expatriates in London, and he becomes a pastor to 2 German-speaking congregations. Again, these are people who care more about their connection to the fatherland, to the homeland, and the church for them in London is much more of a way of feeling connected to Germany and less about being Christians. But he has this time to really reflect on the situation in Germany. But he uses that time while he's there. He meets Bishop Bell, which later will become an archbishop, I believe, and he writes a book about the Archbishop of Canterbury and poetry. And he gets all these network contacts that he will later be able to use for his later activities as a double agent and a spy. When he returns from London, he is asked to be the dean of a seminary, first at Zingst, and then later he goes to Finkenwald and becomes sort of this underground seminary, because the Germans are very concerned about, well, who's going to be a pastor, who's going to have that voice. And so the confessing church has to have a seminary dean, and so they ask him to be. And he's very young still, and he looks like most of the other seminarians who all were courageous and brave and wanted to, you know, lead the church and believed also in the defense of the church, a very kind of nationalistic approach. But he really challenges them on those questions about, you know, what does it really mean to be a Lutheran, a Christian in a German state like this? And he really took some of the students by surprise by bringing up some of these subjects. Here he created a very kind of communal life. In fact, the name that he would have been called would be Herr Doctor, but he asked the seminarians very soon afterwards to start calling him Brother Dietrich rather than Herr Doctor. They began their day in silence. They began their day in prayer, reading scripture. The very first words that should be uttered out of their mouths should be words of scripture. They read Psalms, an Old Testament reading, a Psalm, a New Testament reading, very much like our divine office. So I think that the time when he was in England, probably he got too familiar with the Benedictine forms of prayer and worship and liturgy, and he brought that with him to the Finkenwald Seminary. The end of the day, of course, ended up closing with prayer as well. So it was morning prayer, probably there may have been even a midday prayer, and then an evening prayer. His time, of course, he began to get the attention of the Nazis. They hadn't yet closed him, but finally, by 1937, they closed the seminary. They arrested 27 pastors and students. It was basically, the seminary was on the run. It was wherever they could hold and house the students. And so it wasn't in a familiar building. They had to really be, you know, underground. While he's at Finkenwald, that's where he writes the book, Cost of Discipleship, published in 1937, which we will be discussing in the coming weeks. In 1938, he makes initial contact with the German resistance, and then he's introduced by his brother-in-law to that. And then later in the war, as it was becoming to be more imminent, he couldn't swear an oath or an allegiance to Hitler, and he was concerned about being drafted. So he was urged by his friends to leave Germany. And so he debates about it, thinks about it a while. He eventually gets on the last boat that is available from Germany to the US, and his friends arranged to help him and protect him. They promised him. But when he's on the boat, he's having misgivings already as he's traveling. And he finally gets to the US, and the moment he arrives in the US, he realizes he's made a mistake. So he gets on the last boat that he can to get to Germany, and he felt that he needed to return to be with his people because the people were suffering there, and that if he returned only after the war was over, he wouldn't be able to preach or teach with any sense of authority because he didn't understand what the struggles had been. So he really felt that he needed to be present with his people. When he returns back to Germany, he's harassed by the Nazis. He had to report regularly to the police. He was forbidden to publish any books in 1941. And that's when he joined the Abwehr, a branch of the military and intelligence of the Nazis in a center, the Abwehr is a branch of the resistance movement, an intelligence branch. His brother-in-law, Dohnányi, brings him in. He claimed that Bonhoeffer's wide ecumenical context would be good, that he had established when he was in the US and in Germany and throughout his travels throughout Europe. Dohnányi gave him cover to travel, to seek support from other nations for the German resistance. And he knew that he was supporting and engaging in a movement to assassinate Hitler. In fact, you may have seen the movie Valkyrie, where one of the German colonels brings a suitcase with explosives into a bunker where Hitler and all his generals are plotting the war. And the scene is one where the colonel brings in the suitcase. He stands about 2 people away from Hitler, claiming that he's got hearing problems, and he sets the bomb, leaves the room, but somebody kicks the suitcase under the table. It's a very, very heavy table, providing him the cover to when the bomb goes off, only Hitler is only injured while it kills other officers. But once the Nazis started interviewing people who had been involved in the plot, that's when Bonhoeffer's name surfaces, that Bonhoeffer was involved in the conspiracy. He's arrested in 1943. He became, one of the reasons he was arrested was that he and his brother-in-law helped 14 Jews get to Switzerland. There was a financial transaction that ended up going wrong. Some of the people needed money, and so partly he was arrested because of the financial transaction going haywire, large sums of money with them, and he was charged with corruption initially, and then later they began to be aware that he was involved in the conspiracy. The charges, as you see there, subverting Nazi policy, evading the draft, and using the Abwehr to circumvent his ban on public speaking, and Abwehr using the Abwehr to further confessing church activity. So they basically threw the book at him. They imprisoned him in a prison at Tegel for 1.5 years. He thought he probably would be released, but he was kept there for a full year. He was writing to his family, to not worry. He was fine. He was being treated well, and he was respected by the guards, and one even offered to help him escape. But when the plot to kill Hitler went bad, and they found that he had ties to the assassination plot, he was transferred to Buchenwald concentration camp, and then later to Flossenburg. In a diary of Abwehr, the diary of the head of the Abwehr found that Hitler goes into a rage when he finds out about the assassination plot, and he hangs Bonhoeffer on the 9th of February, 2 weeks before the concentration camp was liberated by the Allies. So if we were to look at his legacy, what has Bonhoeffer left us, and what will we be looking at in the next coming weeks? He began to see that, that the church needed to be Christocentric, focused on Christ versus Hitler, that he appealed to the conservative minded Protestants. He left a legacy of Christianity that needed to be involved in the world, that it had to be costly, that you couldn't be an armchair Christian. You couldn't be a Christian in the comfort of your own protected church. That to be a Christian meant to make sacrifices, both in body and spirit. Bonhoeffer believed very much in the world and creation. He really loved the world, and he believed that he was a spirit in the world, and that he needed to be that his traveling, his whole life needed to be very grounded in this world and not simply pie in the sky when you die. And so he really believed that the world and God's creation was something to be loved and appreciated, and that we should really be in the world. So he believed Christians should not retreat from the world, but act within it, to be very much agents of change as well. And that we needed to be the voice for those who were voiceless, for those who couldn't speak up for themselves, in particular, the Jews. What is truth? Well, God is the standard of truth. And it is more than merely not lying. It is to be truthful, means to be prophetic, to be in relationship with God, not just, legalistically obeying rules and principles, but to really embody that truth. And this is that side of him that was really prophetic. Be willing to act in response to God. It's easy to be legalistic, to walk that fine line between, what the church says and what is acceptable behavior. He believed that, we needed to be ready to accept our sinfulness, our guilt, our freedom. That line about, to receive grace without confession, without an awareness of guilt, is wrong. To live in fear of incurring guilt is itself sinful. God wants us to operate out of freedom and joy to do what is right and good, not out of fear of making a mistake, but because we believe in the principles that God is calling us to. So it's impossible to avoid incurring guilt. But if you wish to live in the world, to live responsibly and fully, you have to be willing to make the ultimate sacrifices. And so he was very much, there was the church he had come out of had been a very kind of armchair intellectual theological experience. And here he's calling us to be flesh and blood, spirits in the world, engaged in struggles for the voiceless, and being agents of change in the world. So we'll be talking more about his theology and next week and the weeks to come, and that's exciting. So for next week, you just read through the foreword, the memoir, the introduction, and the first chapter, okay? And also bring your favorite psalm. So I'll take some questions if you've got them right now, and I'm going to post in the chat as well the Barmen Declaration.
Just amazed that he, considering right from the get-go, he was against the Nazis, and yet he wasn't arrested earlier, and he managed to do what he was able to do because, he had a target on his back from day one.
Right.
Considering the Nazis just sort of arrested and executed people just, willy-nilly.
Yeah.
So also, I just wanted to give you a little bit of genealogy.
That comes out of his family, by the way. He was bred. The entire family had a real sense of justice and of righteousness. That's where it sort of all came out of. That it's not to be silly in the world and to be just like going by convention. No, one had to be really serious. Let me try to reload that again.
His mother's family, her last name was Von whatever, and that means that her family was noble. So his mother came from a very ancient German family,
right?
And so that might have protected him a bit.
Father, I have a question. To be the voice of the voiceless, and to feel that your national government is standing in the way of that happening, could you what was different about Germany at that time? This is a question in naivete, and I have some partial answers, but I'd be interested in hearing a more church-filled answer. What was the difference in Germany that caused him to have to think about murder rather than re-election, as we would do here in the United States today, or we think we can do here in the United States today? Can you just sort of highlight some of those? What would lead him to be so extreme?
Who's him?
Bonhoeffer.
Oh,
the Nazis.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm confused about.
I think it goes back to his roots of his family. There was a sense of right and wrong principles. He'd been brought up that way. I think his experience in New York, in particular, really sensitized him to the plight of, as it says in the book, the Negro and what they were going through, and it sensitized him to people who were being oppressed simply for the color of their skin then. And he came back really, really transformed by that experience, you know.
But I understand that. My
Yeah.
question is deeper than that. He was impressed by that. We have that today, that
Yeah.
people feel they're being oppressed for their color of their skin, for their wanting to emigrate, for their wanting to be a Muslim, a different faith, what have you. What was different about Germany that led him to murder as opposed to a political course to change what he thought would be right?
Well, from very early on, from 1933, he and his entire family saw that the move to have this kind of dictator was just wrong. That imperial dictatorship and oppression like that was just not where Germany needed to be, you know. And he saw the whole family and all the that German circle of elite saw this. Even military officers saw that Hitler was simply this fanatical, it's all about me kind of leader, Führer, father. And that's not, but the country was leaderless at this time. But Taxis gets into that, the situation in the background of Germany. You know, they had lost the war. Inflation was out of control. And the Germans saw all the Reichstag and all the German politicians as simply a bunch of wimpy, not listening to the people leaders. Okay, their popularity was at the toilet. And here comes Hitler, who is a leader, and you know, through propaganda and through manipulation, is able to make people feel proud. He blames the Jews. You know, the whole German sociological political background is the backdrop that really sets the stage to move Bonhoeffer inextricably in that direction.
Well, there's a lot of people in the United States that oppose the exact same things.
Yeah, but the difference is we have the ability to have an election. They did not have that. It was a.
That's what I'm getting at.
It was a rigged election.
Yeah.
So I think they did, but they got so screwed after World War I that Hitler totally capitalized on everybody's feelings of, you know, we really got the raw end of the deal here, and they, you know, just didn't see a way out, and he totally capitalized on that, on their feelings of.
And it actually even goes further than that. It goes back to the unification of Germany. When Bismarck unified Germany, the Prussians basically took over. And the Prussians, and a lot of people think Germans as just, you know, they aren't. They were separate little countries for centuries. And when Bismarck unified Germany, the Prussian model took over, and the Prussians were very militaristic compared to the rest of the Germans. They believed, you know, the Prussian, you know, court and everything, the king, was very, you know, their whole background was what Germany eventually became. The whole Nuremberg thing and all that stuff, that was very Prussian. And so, and they looked down on people like the Bavarians and stuff like that. And, but that was sort of, it started way back when, and that was one of the reasons World War I happened. And then unfortunately with the Treaty of Versailles, a lot of countries like France, they wanted to punish Germany. And we didn't make that mistake the end of World War II. And that's why they didn't have it happen again. But it was kind of what happened to Germany was a bigger picture of how Hitler came into power. And he just walked into this vacuum. And he had people that backed him up. That were militaristic, and it wasn't so much that he was brilliant, it was just the fact that he walked into this vacuum.
Okay, let me flip this argument over. What if I am a firm believer in evangelical fundamentalist religion? I think that people in the state that allows abortion is killing innocent babies. I think that the liberals have preempted all of the press and convinced the populace to support these flaming liberals. And I now see that they've somehow contrived to win the election. So therefore, I think they are wrong enough, and I feel religiously justified to go storm the Capitol so they cannot certify that my leader, who is against the same things I'm against and stands for the same things that I stand, why can't I not violently go in and do something about that? So
because the difference is the attitude in Germany when this happened, Germany had already been militarized by the Prussians, by the attitude. And so, yes, there were people that were against it, and it happened slowly. Hitler didn't just boom, he was here for
I'm saying my argument happened slowly, and they've militarized
but the attitude,
including the media, against me.
But the attitude of the general public, I mean, here in the United States, I mean, yes, we have issues and all that stuff, but the whole idea of democracy is so forefront, but in Germany it wasn't. And so when
remember that before Hitler, essentially you'd had a German emperor, the Kaiser. So they were used to this idea of one man rule.
Exactly.
Republicanism and democracy was really an experiment that failed. And because Hitler was able to blame the Jews and communists, he was able to have a scapegoat.
They didn't have
it's their fault.
I'm saying that there are people in our country that feel right now the same way, in exactly the opposite swing of the pendulum on the political circuit. And they believe that the only way that they're going to get heard is through violence.
Right.
And I'm going more fundamental than, do you believe in democracy or do you believe in this? And we have democratic ways. I'm going more fundamental. If I truly believe that God has spoken to me to get rid of abortion, to get rid of the state that has allowed all of these social injustices to take place, and the only way to do it is through violence, I feel that God has spoken to me to take on a militaristic response to this Führer. You know, given the sociology of my country right now, the cities have lined up, the cities and the liberal what have yous have lined up against me and have taken away my ability to see that my religious beliefs go forward. And I'm going to violently oppose it. Okay, help me out here, because I feel it's the same argument on the other end of the political spectrum.
You're describing ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
You are describing.
I'm describing the people that landed in the Capitol on January 6th.
The people you are describing are basically ISIS. Okay, they are now the enemy. That way of thinking is the enemy, and we have to move against it, not with violence, but with the tools that a democracy has, which is the electoral system and the rule of law and the First Amendment and the electoral process. And that will, if that doesn't, you know, Hitler, when Hitler was elected chancellor, it was one man, one vote, one time. And that was the last time there was any free election that wasn't subject to harassment, persecution, and arrest, and you know, killing opponents and putting them in jail, because the people were desperate and they allowed it. Okay, we're not that far along yet, but what you're describing is the ultimate nightmare. That's the nightmare.
And if we get to there, do we have a religious, if I really follow that line of thinking and I lose my ability to change things through an election, do I have a right to use violence? That's what Bonhoeffer did. That was his ethic. He didn't.
He did have to explain to his seminarians, is it ever okay to kill? And he had to wrestle with that. And so they looked at him as a moral backbone. And his final work was on ethics, which is what he eventually wasn't able to finish it, but it was finished later on by his students. He believed that there were conditions when it was okay to kill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we do it all the time during war.
Yeah.
Military people.
I don't think we in the United States are. I mean, there are some parallels, believe me, from then and now. But I don't think we are in the same situation as the German people. The German people had been, again, defeated, hyperinflation, $1 or one whatever mark was it was 1 billion marks to be able to buy.
It took a wheelbarrow full of money to buy bread.
Yeah, it was a desperate situation. We have a different situation. We have a thriving economy. We have an electoral process. We have a democracy. We have laws. We have a whole nother infrastructure now that is there. And we've got 10,000 troops over in Washington, D.C. right now defending any particular violence. So we have a whole infrastructure that allows people to be able to have a voice. Now, I believe that when you take away people's voices to be able to speak freely, we're going to have a problem. And it's going to actually create more radicalism by shutting down free speech than by allowing the free speech. But we have other mechanisms. If you can't go to Twitter, you can go somewhere else. If you can't go to Facebook, you can go somewhere else. There's media outlets that will voice different people's opinions. We're in a very different situation than I think Germany was. There are some parallels and we can draw them and we can try to learn some lessons. For us, however, Grace Episcopal Church, the question for us is not the political questions. The question for us is, what does it mean for us to be a church? And that's what I want us to stay focused on, is what does it mean for us to be a church? What does it mean for us to follow Christ into the world? Let's leave the politics to a political science class.
No, I'm not. I'm raising an ethical question. I really am, because if I listen to the people and the voice of the people who attacked the Capitol on the 6th, they believe that their right is driven by God.
I don't know if it's a theological. I don't think it's a theological drivenness. I think most of the people who were, voicing this was not theologically based. I think it was based in terms of political anger, not driven. It was driven by a lack of voice, a lack of transparency, all those other issues. I don't think it was theology that drove people to the Capitol.
But in their hearts, that's what they feel.
There may be a few people who did that, but that isn't the majority of the population of the world and of the United States.
No,
anyways,
it's the majority.
Huh? What?
When I'm basically reading, is it ever justified to kill because of your strong beliefs? That's the question I'm trying to raise.
And the answer that Bonhoeffer gave was yes.
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 And the answer I would give would be no, because I can be wrong. I could really think I'm right, but I could be wrong. That's what I'm saying.
Bonhoeffer saw all the Jews being killed. Remember, he was traveling all over Europe at that time, and he knew what was happening in Poland and what was happening to the Jews in Germany.
From 1933 on, you're right, Penny, from 1933 on, the entire Bonhoeffer family was privy to intelligence and information that the average German was unaware of. So they knew what was going on. They knew about the concentration camps.
Right.
They knew that one person's life was not of as much value as millions. And yet, the Jews say if you save one person, it's like saving, all of humanity. But he believed that, and that's why Hitler believed that the plot to kill Hitler would save millions of lives, which.
Yeah, it's the extremism. I mean, we can't really compare today to Hitler. I mean, he was the ultimate evil. And yes, I'm not really big on capital punishment and all that stuff, but I'd kill Hitler in a heartbeat, because he was the extreme evil. I mean, you can't compare him to anything this day except Pope Paul, or some of the most god-awful dictators that just assassinated people and killed people by the thousands. They're way up here, I mean, and they deserve to die. I mean, it's, and yet I don't believe in capital punishment myself. I don't think I could kill, even though I'm in the military. If I had to, but I never had to think about that. But it's just, they're way up here and they deserve to die. They deserve to go to hell, and so to me, that's not really an ethical question, because it's not that I think this is a bad person. It's the world thinks this is a bad person, except for, his few little henchmen. But
this is going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of fun the next 6 weeks.
Fun? Susan's going, what?
I'm always being provocative. I'm sorry, and I'm not sympathizing with
Susan,
people.
don't apologize. Susan, you don't need to apologize. I'm raising my ethical question here, and absolutely,
we'll deal with it.
If not at church, where can you do it, Susan? Right?
Right.
You can't
and
do
we're
it
going
at
to do
church.
it. We're not shutting it down, Susan. We're saying we got to move on. It's 12:12 now. Ooh, 12.
Yeah, my husband even less, because he doesn't like me to speak up. So look at that. He was listening to you.
Here's the book.
He had a question, and he got preempted by all the other discussion. I don't know what his question was.
What was his question? Here.
I don't know. Larry, do you want to ask him?
I know what
Penny's gotten it by now.
Bring your favorite psalm. I know what Penny's favorite psalm is already.
Yes.
Bring your favorite psalm as well.
My favorite is 147, but it's probably a bit too long.
Well,
do you want the entire psalm, or do you just want a part of it?
Tell us the psalm, and then we'll write it down, and then we'll all read it later on when we've got time.
Okay. Well, Psalm 147.
Recommend this book, Bonhoeffer.
Did you upload to the chat?
I tried, and it won't take it. For some reason, it's not doing it. I'm a mess today. I'm getting
we could just email it to everybody.
Yeah, I'll send it to you and see if you.
Could you send today's notes as well? I was trying to copy the screen and print it, but I missed some of them.
Yeah, I'll send it to you as well.
Okay, thank you. So notes plus
Barmen.
The link to, what's the link to?
Barmen Declaration.
The agreement. Okay.
And again, this book is great. Read about half of it, and read.
Has everybody seen the movie? I watched the movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fabulous.
It was good.
I had to watch it twice. I fell asleep the first time.
I've watched it like 3-4 times.
Oh dear.
I'm falling asleep as well.
I have to watch it. I was too busy watching The Mandalorian.
I'm watching it again too. I'm watching it. This is my second time watching it. I'm in season 2.
The Mandalorian?
Oh, The Mandalorian is great. Yeah.
Star Wars.
Which one? What you guys like is not make me go to sleep usually after I watch it.
I bought a child. I bought the Mandalorian child.
Ooh, you got.
You squeeze him. He has 10 little words. He's ooh, ooh, ooh. He talks. And so it's in the box. It's in the box, and I'm gonna keep him in the box, and as a collector, and give him to my grandson someday, hopefully. But he's so cute. Oh my God, he's so cute.
Did you ever see? I think I asked you this. Did you ever see Good Omens?
Yes. Yeah. Love that as well.
Terry Pratchett fanatic.
Have you guys seen The Man on the High Castle?
Oh yes. As a matter of fact, my cousin's daughter is in that show. She plays the young. She plays her as a young child.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I would recommend that. It's very much about Nazi alternative history. I guess you'd love it.
It's great. Good. It's very good.
It's really good. It answers Susan's questions about ethics.
Yeah, it's a little hard to follow at first.
Seasons, Susan, if you watch all 4 seasons, you will get on the whole ethical questions. So you got to watch the whole 4 seasons though.
Yeah,
the ending.
It's really good. It's really good.
All right, folks.
Bye.
It's fun. We'll see you next week. We'll see you for Bible study this Wednesday. And I will send to you, Cindy, or who should I send this email to? You
can send it to me and I'll forward it to everybody.
Okay, you forward it out to everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a new MacBook Air. We will not have this problem next week, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
From your mouth to God's ears.
You need to sit in the spot of your house that Estella sits in. You guys need to switch spaces.
You might want to get a Wi-Fi. Oh, this is backwards, but a Wi-Fi extender. This is the one I got for the church, and I was testing it out at home, and it really helps because I always had a problem with my TV being a little too far away from my router. And and I put this like halfway. And because you're upstairs, where's your router? Downstairs?
It's in one of the bedrooms upstairs.
Yeah, that's the problem. And and this was like $60 on Amazon.
Okay.
Also, do you have Cox, Father?
AT&T.
Oh, I don't know about them. I know Cox. I have to unplug and reroute and replug my router about once a month.
Time.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to do that with AT&T too.
Yeah.
Okay. So that actually clears up a lot of, because I'd be losing connectivity in Zoom or other online things I was doing, and I called to figure out what was happening, and that's what they had me do, and it took care of the problem.
I'll do that.
Rebooting the router.
I know how I'll be spending my
afternoon. The router all the time, but that extender has made a difference. I haven't had to reboot the router at all.
I'll buy one too. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, folks. We'll see you Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.